Pages. I'm the spokesperson of the Israeli consulate here in New York, and I'd like to welcome you all to our event in commemoration of Representative John Lewis, who committed his life to justice and to equality. We will be discussing today the power of words. We have three very, very interesting journalists who will be talking about how the media can assist in fighting racism and also anti-Semitism. But before we start, I would like our acting Consul General of Israel in New York, Mr. Israel Nitzan, to say a few words. Thank you, Israel.
Thank you, Almog. Good morning. We very much appreciate everyone taking the time in your busy schedules for this special Zoom event. I can see here on this Zoom call many friends are with us. I want to thank, first of all, Almog and Noi, our media team, and our panelists for joining us and for initiating and hosting this event. The passing of Congressman John Lewis comes at a fraught time for both the Black and the Jewish communities in the United States. As president of the state of Israel, President Rivlin said recently, we must stand together in fighting all forms of anti-Semitism, and we must stand together in fighting all forms of racism. Anti-Semitism and racism are two sides of the same coin, and we must fight them whenever and wherever they appear. This timely virtual event on the role of media in fighting all aspects of racism and anti-Semitism is titled "The Power of Words." In an era of social media, nuances are disappearing from our public discourse. The media's role is to put things in context and bring the complexities and the nuances back into the public eye. The media can also create symbols, not only by words, but also through imagery. I'm thinking about two examples. I'm thinking about the most famous image of Jewish and Black kinship, in which late Reverend Martin Luther King and late Rabbi Heschel marched together side by side from Selma to Montgomery. The second image that I'm thinking about is a front page image of a Jewish congregant being comforted by a Black friend following the lethal shooting attack in the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. Both images illustrate the power of the media in shaping perception of the relationship between our communities, but also serve as a strong message of brotherhood, humanity, and shared values and destiny. It is now my great honor and pleasure also to introduce my friend, Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who very kindly joined us today to give also a few introductory remarks. Walter, please.
Well, thank you, Council General, for this opportunity. I want to thank you for inviting me. I'm in the middle of traveling, so please forgive me for my background. I have people in the car as well. But as you so noted, you know, the oldest form of hatred and bigotry, obviously anti-Semitism and racism here in this country and abroad, are part of the same coin. Maybe opposite sides of the same coin, but they are part of the same coin. And what we're experiencing now, even as we highlight the depth of the transitioning on of Congressman John Lewis and highlighting his life and his accomplishments, but also understanding that it did not come without really difficult conversations that needed to be had prior to him becoming a Congress member, prior to him becoming an iconic figure, a civil rights iconic figure when he was with SNCC, and making those tough decisions as to where he wanted to go personally as an African-American here in these Americas. Understanding that if he went one way, his career might have been something totally different, but he decided to choose the way in which collaboration, bringing together of people, even those individuals that on their face might appear to be very different, but when you dig deeper, you look into the similarities in the plight of their people. To me, I think that's the legacy that John Lewis has left that often is over, that the people don't always tend to, concentrate on. They concentrate on the walk across Selma, which is extremely important in the plight of this country and the civil liberties of African Americans here in the United States. But also, what were the arduous steps that he needed and decisions he needed to make in an effort to utilize his power, to utilize his influence, ultimately, not only in his district, not only in the halls of the Capitol, but as it proliferated throughout this country and throughout the world. So to me, I think when we talk about celebrating John Lewis's life and having this town hall, this Zoom town hall in his memory, we have to understand that there were some very difficult decisions that had to be made from people who are elected officials, from people who are grassroots organizers and cornerstones of their community, to those who are in the media, and understanding that we all have a responsibility in this, and that we all have to make difficult decisions as to where we want to go with our careers and what we want to do with our lives, and for those lives that come after us. For it was those lives that were before us that put us in a position to even contemplate these decisions in the first place. So, I'm grateful for the opportunity I have in the assembly, serving my district, but understanding that I don't live within the four walls that are the confines of 57th Assembly District. That we live for our constituents who are from all parts of the world, who are from all faiths and all walks and lives of backgrounds, and understanding that if we keep that level of sensitivity and level of tolerance, that we hopefully will live in a better world and leave a better world for those who come after us. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you, Assemblyman Mosley, for your important words. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you so much, even though you're traveling, for making it here and giving us your time. Thank you. We appreciate it. And we're going to move on now to our panel. So let me introduce you to three amazing, interesting journalists who are also good friends. We have here today Danielle Ziri, who's the New York correspondent at Haaretz. We have Brandon Gates, who's our social editor for Korea Newsroom. And we have Asia McKenzie from Incan reporter at News 12. So thank you very much, guys, for being here. I'm going to ask our panelists three questions they'll respond to, and then we'll have a short Q&A. So the audience, whoever has a question, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat box, and I'm sure they'll be happy to respond. So let me start with the first question. Obviously, we talked about this a lot, about the balance that a reporter has to have, because on one hand, you have the responsibility of telling a story and reporting on a story, but on the other hand, sometimes you're part of the story. So for example, being Black or being Jewish, how do you feel when you report on stories of your community? Brendan, let's start with you.
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to discuss this very important matter. I feel very honored to be part of the conversation. As Amog said, I am the social content editor for Courier Newsroom. We are a newer news platform, mostly digital, and we have markets in several different local cities. So it's kind of like bringing local news together and creating a national network. I think that obviously there are many unarmed Black men and women who are being shot by the police. And when I was first involved in journalism, I was an on-air reporter in a local station in Augusta, Georgia. And that's when Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and all of those incidents started happening. For me, it's something that has always kind of been a part of my life because I am a Black man. I mean, my parents have literally raised me to make sure I have as few interactions with police as possible, not because all police are bad, but because we know that these things can happen. And it seems like the rest of the world is just now kind of catching up to these events. These are things that, we have conversations in our families all the time. So it wasn't really surprising, but it's still like gut punching. Like every time you hear a name, every time you see a video, you're always thinking like, wow, that could have been me. That could have been my brothers. That could have been my mother. That could have been, one of my friends. And I think it is important to stop and kind of reflect on that. That doesn't mean that you stop reporting the story. That doesn't mean that, you give like, things that are untrue. But I think the first part is just acknowledging how you feel as an individual, how you feel as a Black person when you see this kind of stuff is going on. And I think also the key is to kind of use it to your advantage, right? So there are things that as a Black man, I know I can put into context in these stories that maybe my white or other races and ethnicity counterparts can't. And so I actually feel a little bit more pride when I'm reporting a story on race, because I can kind of give that firsthand acknowledgement. And I have editors around me, so if I am showing too much of a bias, they'll check me, and I think that that's a really good system of checks and balances. So my thoughts on this is to not shy away from being Black. Actually, use that to your advantage when you're reporting on these very difficult things.
Thank you, Brandon. Aisha, can you maybe add a little bit from your perspective as a woman, how you feel about it?
You said Aisha, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because you're out a little bit. I agree with Brandon completely. Every time one of these incidents happen, I think about my brothers, my nephews, my family as well. And I will say, this is a conversation that we have amongst the Black community about our interactions with police officers. Again, how Brandon said, of course, we don't think they're all bad, but when we see these situations happening again and again, especially in the field of being in media, where we have no choice but to report it, it just becomes a larger deal within our communities and talking about it, because this has been decades and decades of conversation. I think everyone being shut down and in quarantine has brought certain situations to light. You have no choice but to watch. You have no choice but to see it, something that we've dealt with this entire time. I will say, as an anchor reporter, talking about George Floyd was hard for me on air. It was challenging to say it and talk about it and not show the emotion that I wanted to, because I did cry about it. I did have very deep conversations with my Black colleagues and also my non-Black colleagues about how emotional it is to report on something that has to do with your community. Because at one moment, it could be anyone that you know. So I think the challenge is just trying to make sure that you do keep yourself in check, to make sure that when you're writing or when I'm reading, that I am giving the facts. Because if you watch any documentary on Netflix, if you watch any documentary on Hulu or anything, us as media, we document history. So if you want to find out what was happening in 2020, you're going to read an article, you're going to watch a news story, you're going to see the video. So my job at the end of the day is to be objective, but objectivity doesn't mean you cover up what's going on. You show the stats, you make sure you don't mix up protests and riots. You don't fuse the words, which I think, as Brandon was saying, with an advantage as being a part of the Black community, our wording is different. We know for a firsthand accounts of how people of color feel when incidents like this happen. And it's not just they're burning down buildings. We'll find out why people are upset, get the correct interviews. It's almost to the point where if you care enough, and even if you're not in the Black community, you'll make sure you tell a well-rounded story. Because I know we've all seen stories that are so one-sided where it's like, are you even a journalist? So I think our job is to make sure we get the why, because things don't just spark because people just want it to happen. So I also have a team of people who look at my stories, who look at things, and who will also tell me if I am being biased, or if, let's change the wording on this. And it's a discussion. If I feel like a word should stay because that's what it is, then that's what it is. And I'm thankful for my community and the job that I work with, because we're pretty diverse, which I can get into on the other questions, is that we can all look at it and from a perspective and understand. Because there are times as an anchor, when my producers are writing my shows for me, when I anchor and not necessarily report, I have to message them like, hey, let's change up this script because it seems this is not really the story. You're highlighting the riots, but you're not showing the peaceful protests. So I think the challenge is just making sure that everyone else around me is correctly reporting the facts, because when people look back on this in 5-10 years, or the kids who really don't know what's going on want to know what happened in 2020, which is a whole lot, as we know, I want to make sure that we documented history correctly. So my challenge is just making sure I keep my emotions in check, but as Brandon said, use me being a part of the Black community, being a Black woman, as an advantage to write the story. So
I'm hearing it a lot is, acknowledge your feeling. It's okay about how you feel, and then go into the professional aspect. But there is a system of check and balances. And I also want to hear from Danielle, being Jewish, reporting on anti-Semitic incidents. Asia talked about George Floyd. I'm sure you can talk about Pittsburgh and other anti-Semitic incidents that happen. How does it make you feel as a Jewish woman and a reporter?
Look, I think it's really interesting you phrased the end of your question that way, because my colleagues here will agree. When you go into journalism as a profession, you go because you care. You don't go for the free time you're going to get, because you won't get any. You're not going to go for your money, because let's face it, you guys can you're not going to get any. You're going because you care about injustice. And usually you'll be the type of person who just can't shut up when something is unfair. And that's why I went into journalism. So I think reporting on any community being affected by a hate crime, if you don't take it a little bit personally as a journalist, you're not doing the job right in general. When it comes to the Jewish community, for me, obviously I've been here doing correspondence work for Jewish Israeli media for 5 years. In New York, and during those 5 years, anti-Semitism has been on the rise, and we've seen Pittsburgh, Muncie, Jersey City, and every single day on the streets of Brooklyn against Orthodox Jews, these incidents are happening. It is something that I take, personally, because it's enough for me to walk around the street with a big sign that says I'm Jewish, or just a Magen David around my neck, and I will get the exact same treatment that a very visible Orthodox Jew will get in the streets of Brooklyn. Understanding that we are alike in that sense, and that the haters will not differentiate between me and them, is an important key to this. In terms of reporting, yes, it's revolting. I will never forget coming across last year a Facebook page with 16,000 subscribers, spreading hate about Orthodox Jewish people who live in Ocean County, New Jersey. And these people were just spreading hate about the Orthodox Jews living in their area, and how they're messing up development, and just terrible things, up to threats that I saw. And you're watching it, and yes, as someone who went into journalism, because you can't shut up when you see something like this, you want to respond to those people on Facebook. You want to report them. You want to do all this. But I think we also have to remember that as journalists, the fact that we are paying attention to these issues, the fact that we are bringing these issues to the forefront in terms of giving it a platform, a national, local, whatever platform, making sure people know about this, you're doing something by doing that. This is what we can do in the position we chose to be in, to be part of this, but also make sure that you're professional and keep it to the facts, and make sure that your audience has enough information so they can make their own opinion. My opinion doesn't matter in my work. What matters is that I give enough facts to my audience to make their own opinion. And when you feel that urge of sort of, I want to do something about this, I just remind myself that by publishing an article about this Facebook page, for example, that I saw, or this man who was attacked in the streets of Brooklyn, I did something about this in my journalistic way.
Thank you, Danielle. And you really do have the power, the three of you, to really change things and change trends, and even if not change them, audience to something that's going on that people maybe wouldn't know about. I'm going to move into the second question. Again, if the audience has any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat box. So Asia, I'm going to start with you, but it's to the three of you. The power of words. When we talk about wording, how important is it? You mentioned it a little bit. Let's say you report about incidents, anti-Semitic or racist. Do you think about the language you're using and how you're using it?
Huge. It's very important. So I also cover Brooklyn. So Danielle, we had this conversation before. I am grateful enough to work with a lot of Jewish coworkers. I, just like how I would teach them about wording within the Black community and talking about stories with us, I rely on them heavily when reporting about stories of Jewish culture, especially in Brooklyn. and Riverdale and the Bronx, because the last thing I want is for someone to think that I have this internal bias, which I do not. I think it's important to lean on your colleagues because we don't know everything, and I haven't lived the life of a Jewish person. So if it's a story, especially about heinous crime or something about anti-Semitism, I want to make sure what I'm saying is not offensive and doesn't victimize the victim. And I think that's super, super important because I read so many articles about what happens within the Black community where it's almost like it seems like it's our fault. So I want to make sure I'm not doing that to a different culture and someone else. So words are powerful because you can even go on your own Facebook page or go on Twitter. And if someone in a high ranking position says something that's even slightly off, thousands of responses. You got to be careful. Our entire career are words and visual. Like that's what we do. So if I mess that up, I'm not a good journalist. Honestly, I'm not. So there's no shame in leaning on people if you're ignorant to a topic and you want to give justice where it's due. I think it's important that you talk to people that you're surrounded by, whether it's a friend, a colleague, anyone. I'm sure I can always call on you if I'm like, how does this sound if I'm talking about an anti-Semitism event that happened in Brooklyn, which were many hate crimes that happened over the span of, I believe, the end of last year and in the beginning of this year as well. So I guess for me, we've covered them. I just want to make sure that when I'm reporting it, I'm not, again, victimizing the victim, because I feel like people have good intentions, but they don't realize because they're not a part of a community what they're doing, and they're doing more harm than good. Still, of course, telling the facts, but you have to be sure that you're telling, like you said, everything. Don't leave a part out. Like, give all the facts and let the audience decide what they feel about it. But for me, a lot of the times there's no opinion. I feel it's almost like a human rights issue and just being a human and morals. And if something's wrong, something's wrong. You can't, like a lot of the attacks where a lot of people were punching these Jewish men in the face and running away. Like that's the story. And it's unprovoked. Like I have to make sure that I have to say all those things so that people are like, you're leaving something out. I don't want them to wonder. This is the story. This is what it is. And I want to make sure my words explain every single part of that when I'm talking about a different culture. I can work with my own. I understand my own, but it's talking about someone else's that I want to be sure I'm correct.
I think you mentioned something really important, because we call this panel the power of words, but these days it's not only about words, it's a lot about visual, whether it's TV or social media. So that's another thing that we have to take into account. But I want to hear a little bit from Brandon. How do you feel about choosing words?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head about words being paired with visuals. I often think about when you see lively protests, some of the things that like reporters will use, like angry and rioting and a lot of these things. But if there's like a sports team that wins a big game and there's like chaos in the streets, those young people are passionate, because of the color of their skin. So I think that it's really important to make sure you're using the correct words with the correct visuals, because we have a big, but there's a lot of power in journalism. There's a lot of people, no matter what outlet they go to, they are going to these outlets to get the news. And I know that there's all this like, this is a far left publication or this caters to the far right. And definitely those things play into, how people consume the news. But it's just very important to, again, make sure you don't call a protest a riot, or like people will be screaming and it's like, so why are they angry, as Aisha has said before, like kind of getting into the nitty gritty of why people are responding the way they are responding. People aren't just rioting because they want to. Like this is like decades and decades of white supremacy, having to deal with that, Black oppression, the economic disparities that a lot of people of color and minority communities experience. All of that wrapped into one. And I know that sometimes, especially on TV news, when you only have like 2 minutes to tell a full story, it's hard to get that context in. But that's why more so now than ever, it's just really important, whether you're talking about an anti-Semitic attack, or you're talking about a racist attack, or you're talking about something that affects different communities, it's really important to, as Aisha mentioned before, rely on your colleagues to kind of give you that context and to make sure you're telling the full story, because one false move and you could change many, many opinions, and for the worse.
And if I can piggyback off Brandon very, very quickly, you talked about social media, which is a big thing. So we all know many people don't actually click on the articles, they just read the headline. We know that for a fact. That's it. I see it all the time. We have to be careful with our headlines, with our words, and also our own personal social media. So I'm a part of a lot of Facebook groups, and they would share some things that journalists put. And there was an incident where there was a protest, I'm not sure which city, and a news van got destroyed. Let's be real, there's distrust in the media right now with a lot of things. The person who wrote this status, our news van just got destroyed, these animals, blank, ... I didn't care what he wrote after that. It was an older white man. And he didn't understand why he was getting flack for saying animals. But would you say the same thing as Brandon was saying if it was a sports protest? So even on our social media pages, we got to be careful how we express ourselves, because animals, it's almost just like, what do you mean? It's because they're people of color, or because they're Black? So it's important with words that we put as our caption. If my news van is destroyed, no human's an animal. So I'm not going to write that, especially if it's during a race issue dealing with people of color, where in the past people have compared us to animals before. So that was a poor judgment call. And I think that's something that is also in the power of words, being very careful, because you may seem simple to you, but saying animals, even me as a journalist, like, whoa, what do you mean by that? And I don't know this person. So imagine how the people in his television market feel about him, the distrust. Now they really don't trust you after that. So I just wanted to piggyback on that.
You know, you mentioned also something really important when it comes to social media and words. How do you frame a message? How do you put a message out when you have 140 characters, but you have a lot of context and it's a lot more complicated? And today we have to oversimplify things, whether they're visual or in words. And I want to hear a little bit more from Danielle, because she has both experience in the broadcast industry, but also now she's using words writing for Haaretz. So how do you feel about visual and words?
Look, I'll give you an example. When I report on anti-Semitic incidents, a lot of the times the victims of the incidents are Orthodox Jews. And I noticed in my writing that a lot of the times the word ultra-Orthodox will come up. You'll see it in headlines, you'll see it on social media, you'll see it in stories that usually are sort of not great about portraying the community. I've had a lot of back and forths with my editor. I personally refuse to use the word ultra-Orthodox. To me, if you're a member of the Orthodox Jewish community, you are Orthodox. I can then specify what sect of Orthodox Judaism you are in, or if you're Hasidic, I can go into detail on that, and I'd much rather do that. When you use the word ultra-Orthodox, you're basically already, you're taking an already alienated community, because people who are not ultra-Orthodox, even Jews who are not ultra-Orthodox, tend to look and say, like, them and us, different. When you're using ultra-Orthodox, you're even more playing into this alienation of, we are so different. They are ultra-Orthodox. It's completely different. And at the end of the day, this word doesn't bring anything. It's not giving my audience any more indication than what they should get. It's not detailing the story more. It's not giving any important fact. So I've made it a point to erase that word and just use Orthodox, or specify what sect. But I do still have back and forth with my editor about this, and trying to make him understand that this is a problem. Now, the way I got to that is by talking to the community that I'm reporting about. I have to tell you, when I was in Monsey the day after the stabbing attack in Hanukkah, I interviewed the people on the ground there who were gathering around that house where it happened. And when I asked them about sort of what do you think is contributing to this climate? Almost all of them pointed to media reports saying how these media reports, and including media reports in Israel, are portraying the community without ever talking to the community. Talking about somebody without talking to them, you are losing so much information, so much valuable learning that you could be doing as a journalist. So the way I learned these things is by talking to people, going to Borough Park, meeting with Orthodox Jewish people, and learning about what it is that makes their world go round. Why is it that they are choosing this lifestyle? What is it that offends them from us journalists? And being able to understand that, I've made a lot of friends in that community, and I'm learning constantly from them about how our reports, even though we don't go into it with a bias or wanting to cause any harm, sometimes cause harm.
From you is also that it's a lot about education, to build bridges, know your community, know the community you're reporting about. And even if you know your community, as you mentioned, you are Jewish, you know the Jewish community, you might not know a certain part within the community. Which maybe also happens in the Black community, to be honest, I don't know, but I guess it probably also divides into different groups. And I want to move on to our last question, and then we're going to go into the QA because I already have a few questions from the audience. So I just want to know, looking into the future, what do you feel is the role of the media when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism and racism? And what do you think the industry is going to look like in, let's say, 10 years from now, with social media coming in and distrust and everything changing? So Brandon, you want to start?
Sure. I think Isha said something earlier that really stuck with me. Wrong is wrong. So no matter how you try to spin it, no matter how polarizing things can be, especially during this time, if there is an unarmed Black man that is shot and killed by a police officer, if there is a Hasidic Jewish man that is punched in the face just because someone doesn't like Jewish people, both of those incidents are wrong. There's really no room left for debate. And I think that it is important that we as journalists make sure we get that message across. I do believe that despite what you may see on social media, I believe that it's changing for the better. Now you have people who are not afraid to speak up and speak out against, false reports. If there is bias, there are a lot of people that will tell you on social media, like they'll say, no, you got this wrong, or here's the context. Whereas in the past, we kind of waited for organizations like the Society of Professional Journalists or the Columbia Journalism Review to be kind of like the saviors of journalism. They were the ones who said, oh, this is wrong, but now we all can do it. And I think that as we start to diversify newsrooms, which God knows it needs to be even more diverse. I mean, I'm like Aisha, I'm blessed to be a part of a diverse newsroom, but overall, we know that we need more journalists of color, more journalists of different faith backgrounds, to really be in these newsrooms and help tell those stories. But I am hopeful that with just how social media works and how journalism is diversifying slowly but surely, that I think that in 10 years, it'll be a lot better and it'll be a lot different.
Do you agree, or you think differently from Brandon? Yeah, sorry. Do you agree with Brandon? You think it will get better and look differently in 10 years from now, or you think differently?
So you asked a two-part question, so I'll answer it in two parts. The first, you talked about the role of the media. I think that we have, and this is sort of the same answer for both, but we have to realize that as what our job is as media. And as I said before, our job is to give you the information so that you can make your opinion. My opinion doesn't matter. You're not subscribing to Haaretz to learn my opinion. If I wanted you to do that, I would write an opinion section, as an opinion column, and that's a different thing. But sometimes when we are reporting on these issues, without, doing the research, or not being able to do the research, because that's just the reality, we end up causing harm. And I'll give you the example of, for example, not just COVID, but let's go back to the measles crisis. During the measles crisis, there was a lot of talk about how the measles is spreading in the Orthodox Jewish community, and how there are anti-vaxxers in the community. And it was almost portrayed on both local news, but also national news, as if, and including Jewish news, as if the Orthodox Jewish community is an anti-vaxxer community, which, if you're actually doing the research and you're looking at all the letters that were issued in Yiddish, in English, in Hebrew, by all the rabbis in the community, you're seeing that it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, they are encouraging vaccination. They are saying it's an imperative to vaccinate. But because the virus, this measles spread within the Orthodox Jewish community, and you can talk about COVID the same way, why does it spread? Simply because the Orthodox Jewish community lives in a much denser situation. They have much more dense living quarters. There's more people within one household. So naturally, any community that has this kind of condition will get more spread of the virus. However, when you're portraying and you're hyper focusing on this community, which, by the way, anti-vaxxers, the biggest community of anti-vaxxers in Beverly Hills, California. So when you're actually portraying, hyper focusing on one community, you're creating a situation where people cross the street when they saw an Orthodox Jewish person walk because they were afraid of the measles. One woman was asked to leave the bus at some point when she was trying to take the bus. So sometimes, by simply focusing on a story we think is straightforward, it's a story, so I'm reporting it, you are creating a climate in which you are encouraging this anti-Semitism. And a lot of the times, anti-Semites on these groups, on Facebook groups, will point to Jewish media or other Jews saying, they're talking about the Orthodox this way, so I'm okay talking about it this way as well. And you definitely don't want to be their excuse. In terms of the industry, of how I see it going, I don't know necessarily that it has to change. I think we as journalists have to reconnect back to why is it that we're even doing this job, what our purpose is. And when you reconnect to that and you understand that this is your place as a journalist, not to start making yourself a star, not to start putting yourself in the forefront and putting your own opinions in the forefront, but reporting the facts as they are. And like Aisha said, all of the facts, not just parts of the facts, not the ones that make you comfortable, not the one that make your editor comfortable, but actually fight for that, to have all of the facts. If you're reconnecting with that purpose as a journalist, we're going to make this industry better. The problem is, and for example, people ask me a lot, and I'm sure Brandon too, because we went to school together, but people ask us a lot, why did you even go to journalism school? It's a waste of your money. You don't need a diploma to be a journalist. Just open a blog, And I consistently say to people, there are things, of course, you will learn on the job and not at school, but in journalism especially, there are things you will learn at school you will never learn on the job, and that's ethics. And when you're reconnecting to that, you're going to make your industry better. You're going to be a better reporter. And the day you begin to forget that, you find yourself forgetting that, quit. Don't do it. It's too dangerous, too much responsibility to mess around with it.
Aisha, I want to also hear from you about what you think about the future of journalism in this context. But if I can point out one trend, if you want to answer, is that I've had a lot of conversations with reporters and journalists recently, who say they also see themselves as activists in a way. So, if journalism used to be completely unbiased, you would say you're unbiased. Some reporters actually say today, why should I? I can still be professional, but I see myself more as an activist or journalism activism. I think there's like a new term. So how do you feel about that?
I mean, if you work for any organization, that's a really thin line. I was speaking earlier how, some things there's just a right or wrong on the subject. And if you find yourself, because activists have a point. They have something they're doing. They have a mission. My mission is to tell the story, not a story, the story. And although I could agree with activists, I can say I'm an activist separately for certain things and a reporter and a journalist on other things. I don't think those two can be fully combined because there's going to be some bias in your reporting. So I would like to see the reports of those who say they're journalist activists as a hybrid career, because I'm very interested. Because I feel like that's difficult because if just for example with the Black Lives Matter movement, like I can agree with certain aspects of the movement and also want the change, of course, within our society, within our government, but I also have to be mindful that I'm a journalist. You know, this is not my personal blog. Like Danielle was saying, it's not about me. You're reading my report or you're listening to me speak to hear about what happened. If I wanted to go into blogging, I would have done that. And that's a part of ethics. That's a part of just what you're doing. So it's either you can be an activist if you want, but it should never teeter into your career as a journalist. That is not, those are two separate things. As for the future of journalism, I am loving the fact that Twitter is doing fact checking, sorry, hard to say, because it keeps people on their toes. Because honestly, a lot of people just read and believe. They don't research. It's so much easier to believe what you already believe, if that makes any sense. You're not going to dive deeper to see an alternate opinion or find the actual fact. So I'm enjoying the fact that social media creators, like the creator of Twitter, is actually marking it so that you may want to look further into it, to hold yourself accountable as well, to make sure that you're not just taking something at face value and make sure you know, like, okay, this is true. Like that's important to me. And a lot of publications are doing it. I know CNN.com does it. I know all these different places do it on the side. Like, let's fact check, especially during debates with the presidential election and different things like that on both sides. Brandon touched on this as well. I'm hoping that in the future, newsrooms diversify, like Brandon was saying, because Brian's my brother. Brandon was saying, because it's important. Before I even open my mouth, the change starts within the newsroom. The writing starts in the newsroom. My editing is in the newsroom before it even hits the air. So the newsroom needs to reflect the community we're speaking about. And I'm talking about not just Black and brown. I'm talking about everyone of different backgrounds need to be included, especially people of color, because we don't make up that much of a newsroom. I think there was a recent survey that said throughout the US, we make up like 13%, like a very small number. So it starts with the hiring process, and not just on air, it starts with management. So I believe that in the future, I would love to see more people of color in management positions in the news, because I think that really helps when it comes to how a station, especially local stations, report a story, because your management ultimately has the final decision on what goes on air. So that's important. Or to hire people who get it and who understand. So that's what I'm hoping for in the future. Can't tell the future.
It's all up to you. It's also up to hiring and HR, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
If there's any HR people here. So I'm going to move into the Q&A, because we have quite a few questions. If only one of you can respond. So I have a question here from someone who says, as a former New York newspaper reporter, how much pressure is there today from editors and producers to get the conflict story rather than the context story, especially with shrinking newsrooms? So you guys want to respond?
Yeah, I actually wonder about this. Whenever you see something like a Ferguson happen, you see reporters from all over, like even international reporters, like swoop in this community, and they are trying so hard to have like the live shots with the riots in the background and all of this action and stuff like that. I mean, the reality of it is most of these news organizations are funded by ad revenue, and ad revenue is generated by clicks. So it's unfortunate that that's just kind of the way it goes. There have been big push for the public to actually start paying for news, but I understand that with the internet and easy access, especially Twitter, where you can get news at your fingertips, that's a little harder, or people don't necessarily consider paying for news. So unfortunately, I think a lot of it is like, what is this? What's going to be this major conflict that we can promote? And I think even in addition to that, even if that's the route you're going to go, what always disappoints me is that after the rioting has stopped or after the protesting has stopped, these journalists just flee and they leave this community like broken, and there's no follow-up. I mean, journalists get their Emmys or their Pulitzer Prizes or whatever other awards that they're given, and they just kind of leave it like bare. And I think that that is probably the most disheartening thing, because as a journalist, we are supposed to see these stories from the start to the end. There's like, even beyond like conflict, when you think of things like the Flint, Michigan water crisis, this is something that's still going on, but it's not attractive anymore. So you rarely see people cover those stories. So I think there is a lot of pressure to cover stories that have major conflict, so you can get those clicks in addition, and those clicks then turn into revenue, and that's how news organizations stay afloat.
If I may just add a quick something, I think that oftentimes the sort of image that people who are not in the media have of a journalist, because obviously they're being sold this idea of fake news and we're all in it for fame or whatever. But oftentimes they'll kind of imagine that I'm here writing my story and there's an editor above my shoulder here who's telling me, not this word, that doesn't get me clicks, another word. And it is not the way it works. At the end of the day, you're the journalist and you're putting your name on a story, right? So obviously it comes with time, and obviously when you're starting right out of school, you may be less comfortable about doing that. But after 10 years on the job, I've gotten very comfortable with telling my editor, no, sorry, but this I really want in the story. You're not taking that out. I think it's important. I spoke to this person. I realized how important that was for them. I think that should be portrayed. There are things where you should stand your ground. Obviously, you choose your battles, especially in the beginning of your career. But eventually, it's your name on the story. So I don't want to deal with the clicks. I don't want to know how many shares. I don't want to know the ads that are in my story. I just want to know that I put something out that represents the people I interviewed in the way that they would present themselves, and also given the facts to people. So I think it's also about just being a aware journalist, and a journalist that's reconnected all the time to your purpose, and butting heads with your editor when you have to butt heads with them.
And
I don't put my name on anything that I don't agree with.
Exactly.
Well, and I just want to push back.
Yeah.
I just want to push back on that for just a little, because one of my friends is actually going through this right now. So he wrote a story about AOC nominating Bernie Sanders at the Democratic National Convention, and the headline, which was not his fault, he advocated for a different headline, basically said that, she didn't endorse Biden, and this created like all this chaos and pandemonium like everywhere, and there's literally nothing he could do. So her team was emailing him to try to change his name is on the story. So while I think in a perfect world, yeah, you can like, and I happen to have really good editors that actually allow me to help craft the tweet and help craft the big headlines of things that I write, but that's not always the reality. So I just wanted to say, like, depending on where you are, you could.
And I think it's also about, with more time on the job, you also know what organization is something you're proud to work for. I can honestly say I'm very proud to work for Haaretz. These are people who are running these things by me. They're very aware that at the end of the day, it's my name on the story. They're also very open-minded. And I think that having an editor that's open-minded and being able to have that discussion with your editor, that's something I really value after, having been almost a decade on the job. I sort of learned that from trying and failing. So it's also, about later on when you can afford to do it more than earlier, being able to choose the place you want to work for and being proud of the place you want to work for.
think, you know, it also, like you said, it depends what organization you work for. And I agree with Brandon because we visited a lot of, you know, major news outlets where you can't really, you know, talk back to your editor or like make your decision. And there's a business model running compared to our outlets or other smaller outlets where it's more maybe like a family environment where you can actually have the conversation. But I want to move to the next question. So if we look at the Black community and also the Jewish community, they have obviously their own media, their own newspaper, their own TV outlets. How do you think they feel? That's also a question from the audience about the mainstream media covering the issues. So how do you think the Black community feels about them covering racism or, on the other hand, anti-Semitism?
So it's kind of like what Brandon said. I work for a local news station, so it's a bit different. We see stories from the beginning to the end. It's all about the follow through because I work in the Bronx and Brooklyn. I have worked in the Bronx and Brooklyn for 4 years. I know the people. I know the community. I understand their stories. I've told their stories for years. When mainstream comes in, there's a level of, they're excellent journalists, but if I can't report in Ferguson because I can report in Ferguson, and do the local stories. But if I'm a national reporter, I've never reported there. So I don't know this area. I don't know this section. So there comes this ignorance, and watching as not a journalist, but as a woman of color, as a Black woman, sometimes I'm just like, this doesn't feel right when you're watching mainstream media. Even though they're excellent journalists, it's an ignorance that you don't mean to do. But if you don't report in these communities every day, you're going to miss something. So that's why when riots or protests or anything happen, I usually go on the website of the local media and watch their live stream. I usually watch the live stream of the actual stations that are reporting day in and day out in those cities instead of putting on the mainstream all the time. Even though I do watch CNN a lot and I respect those journalists so much, but I think there's a difference when you're talking about a small urban community and things happening there, because there could have been a buildup in issues happening and then this exploded. But mainstream wouldn't know that because they haven't been reporting there for months or years. So I'm a news junkie, as I should be, I guess, as a journalist. So I do go to different websites of the different affiliates within whatever city these events are happening and watch their coverage, because I think I'm going to get a deeper look at the story that way.
Yeah, I just want to add, I also have local news on all the time. Well, not right now because we're in the middle of a panel, but usually I have local news. Sorry, Aisha, it's not News 12, it's New York 1, but
Shame.
Okay, but I have it on all the time because they'll give me an idea of something that I can then develop into a more Jewish story, or I'll see something on the surface that I can go deeper in. My criticism is more to local journalism because I've noticed that a lot of times, you know, when you're a general assignment reporter, or you're doing a lot of varied things. Yes, you have a geographical beat, but you're touching on so many different things. And so, for example, during COVID, you see a family of 10 Orthodox Jews in the street, and you're thinking it's a gathering. It's not a gathering. It's one family that lives under the same roof. So, but you only know that if you have, like you said, those relationships with people. I think it's always key when you're interviewing someone, you take their number, you make sure you send them the story by email afterwards. You make sure to keep in contact with the people because you're going to need them maybe at some point later on. And at the same time, it's also building sources, building a relationship. I went to Texas last November to visit a really wonderful Jewish community, spent 2 days there. I think, you know, in 2 days, I was sort of given a lot of different perspectives, went on different tours of the place. And it was really interesting. I kept in touch with them. I'm not just doing this one story and moving on. It's important to keep in touch. And then during COVID, I went back to see what's going on with them. How are they doing? So called them often and got a story out about how their community is dealing with things. So I definitely agree with both my colleagues. Relationship with sources is just key to understanding things, because only people you're reporting about can tell you about themselves. You can't just make that up.
Relationship with sources, but also education, getting to know the other. And one thing I can say about Brandon and Asia, for example, we went to get on a delegation to Israel. And that's one way, because you can read and you can watch TV, but at the end of the day, you have to meet the people to actually understand what's going on and understand the complexity of it all. And unfortunately, we have more questions, but we're already running out of time. So I'm going to ask one more question, and if you can answer really, really shortly. If you had to give the audience here today one advice as viewers, as readers, what should we pay attention to?
I would, if I can give advice, is do not only look at one source. Read multiple articles, watch multiple stations, and really take this time while we have nothing else to do to check your own bias. Because I feel like when you start looking around and reading different articles and looking at different news stories and packages, you can kind of see a full story instead of the one you want to. So as viewers, I always tell people, do not get your news from one source, because one source, like, I may only have 1:30. Someone else has 4 minutes to tell the story, and a newspaper article can give you more. I honestly believe, I shop around, everyone else should as well. You don't buy your clothes from the same store. You go around to different places because there are different types of clothes. So I think you need to definitely 100% look at different articles, watch different TV stations, and get the full story. Because people complain about bias because they only watch one thing, or you're only comfortable with watching something you agree with. I encourage viewers to get uncomfortable and really learn the full story.
To touch on that, I would say actually read the story. Go beyond the headline. Go beyond the tweet, because those things can, some, as we just discussed, sometimes the headlines don't exactly tell you the full story. Sometimes the headlines are for the clicks, and then people are resharing that and retweeting it, like being angry, and they haven't actually read the story. And also support good local journalism. I know it's a lot, maybe right now in the pandemic where budgets are kind of tight, maybe not right now, but when you're able to do so, actually subscribe to these, to newspapers, subscribe to these local media organizations specifically, because they're the ones that are, as Aisha said, they're the ones on the ground running, giving you beginning, middle, and following up. And that's how you really get a sense of like good actual reporting. So yeah, that would be my advice.
I'll pick it on what he said and say, yeah, if you're reading just the headline of a story, you're not reading our story, because in most places, we don't make the headline. There's an editor that makes the headline. Yes, I personally have a say in the headline. I'm given 3 options, and I can sort of say, I like this one better, or let's change this. But in most places I've worked before, headline's not up to me. So if you are reading just the headline, you're not reading anything that I wrote. And then if you're attacking that journalist for the headline, you're also attacking them for something they didn't write. So that's definitely an interesting tip. The other thing I will say is, do not accept low standards of journalism as what you deserve as readers. You deserve a lot more than what's being offered to you. I'm gonna trash on Israeli TV right now, but there's a very popular TV channel in Israel that's doing most of the ratings that I've watched during quarantine, and I was floored, because there are things where you'll watch, especially on television, but also in newspaper writing, you're given things that you should not be given. Don't let a journalist make a claim without giving you a link to the source of the data where he found that claim. Because if you're letting him just tell you, the Orthodox Jewish community relies heavily on food stamps, that's it. Where's the data? Show me the numbers. And that goes back to the show, don't tell. Show me what are the numbers that make you think that. Don't tell me that it's that way. I deserve the whole process of thinking that you had before you wrote that sentence. That's what you guys deserve as an audience. And taking something less than that, accepting something less than that as okay journalism is wrong. You don't just accept that for what it is. Don't just accept that because the name is popular and it's a good website, it's considered a good website. No, you need to know what the thinking is. You need to be aware of the source where we found this. I always link my stuff in the stories. You'll always find a word you click on and you get another report about this thing that happened in the past. So this to me is very important, not just media literacy and being able to recognize what is under the opinion section and what is under the news section. Those are two different things, and it's important for you to look up at the section that you're reading and make sure that you know in what section you're in. But also, do not accept this standard. Just, you deserve more than that, and you should hold people accountable to that.
Yeah,
I agree.
Follow professional sources, follow a few sources and not the same source, and also look beyond the headline. So to conclude this panel, first of all, I really want to thank Assemblyman Mosley and also the Acting Consul General of Israel in New York, Israel Nitan, for staying on this conversation the whole time. I know you're both very busy people, and I didn't expect it actually. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for the three amazing journalists. You're doing a beautiful, amazing job. You have so much power. And even though I've worked with journalists for the last 3 years, this conversation really makes me understand how much power you guys have in shaping the landscape. So please continue doing your important work. And, you know, I just want to say that I hope that we will remember today not only the power of words, but also the power of humility, and also the power of optimism. And hopefully, you know, this will be a better and healthier world too. And I also want to thank Noy Asraf, our Director of Media Outreach from the Consulate, who did an amazing job for organizing this panel. So thank you so much. And let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be a part of it.
And follow our reporters on Twitter and also on the news.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.
Was this taped? Was this taped if you missed some of it?
Yes, you can find us on Facebook, and Noy, it's also taped, right?
Yeah.
So if you go on Facebook on Israel in New York, you will find all the panelists and their contacts and everything, and we'll tape it and we can also email it out. Thank you to the audience for attending. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.